This video is brought to you by the lovely guys over at Robotoys. For all your Hasbro, Takara, third-party and knockoff desires, Robotoys has you covered. For 10% off, use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout. Now on to today's diagnosis.
Read the disclaimer! On the other one, you bastard!
Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown and welcome to part 6 of Seacons Week. If you were to ask most fans which Seacon they were least looking forward to, most people who actually don't have the Seacons yet would say Tentakil. Now most people who would have them would probably say Lobclaw, but going into this set before it was out, yeah, Tentakil wasn't exactly given the best shot. And I mean, yeah, it's understandable. Power of the Prime's Moonracer is one of the worst figures of that line. And that's saying something when Power of the Primes was one of the worst lines in recent memory. I know some people say Cyberverse is worse, but that was designed for little kids. You can't really count it. Without exaggeration, pretty much everything with this figure is absolute rubbish. So, understanding that, is this figure able to rise above it? So, I suppose for context, here's a mini review of Power of the Prime's Moonracer. The alt mode is trash, the paintwork on the front is alright, but on the back it's trash. The transformation is trash, the robot mode is trash, the head sculpt is trash, the articulation works fine but looks trash. Need I continue? I can go on, but everything this figure does is utterly horrible. Siege managed to rectify a bunch of these issues though with the release of Chromia and Nightbird. I do quite like these figures, because a lot of the baggage that comes from forcing 2 extra modes into an already flawed design was released. Still, I do kinda wish Fembot designs would stop chucking all the kibble on the back. There are ways to do it without sacrificing the proportions too much, and even if you can't be asked using your head for such things, there's always the option of depicting more realistic proportions. Not every Fembot needs to be a supermodel. But anyway, that's the past, and here we have a retool that's... Yo, Vaughn, are you sure this is a retool?
Yeah, positive. Quite extensive, ain't it?
Yes. Very extensive indeed. Okay, right off the bat, you can tell they went all out with designing this thing. No punches pulled, no paint slacked off, no tooling left behind, balls to the walls designer inspiration. And that's really f***ing commendable. Out of all the beast modes, from an objective standpoint, this is easily the best designed of the whole set. The amount of metamorphosis this design has gone through is f***ing insane. But, and there's a big but, I don't like it. Call me as biased as you like, but although I have virtually no complaints with this alt mode, I really dislike the design. Honestly, it's the depiction of the mouth that gets me. The red lips and the grey on silver teeth are completely ugly when it comes to my own personal tastes. I would have much rather they'd gone with the toy style, with a greater emphasis on the blue. But, that being said, it's basically as Master Force animation accurate as they could have gotten without sacrificing the integrity of the design. Considering this design was never intended to appeal to Western audiences and was simply picked up by Hasbro due to the benefits of the brand unification, I do understand what they were going for. And hey, as much as fans like myself hate to admit it, toon accuracy is where the money is. Japanese fans want it, and we know this because Takara directly manufactures figures based on mail-in surveys, and Western fans sure as hell want it as well. It's not a vocal minority. The majority of this fandom has a hard-on for G1, and it's gotta follow the drawing and nothing else. Am I salty? Yes, but at the same time I recognize that they have expertly achieved what they set out to do. And it's not like what they set out to do was lazy. Tentakil is designed immaculately. The paint on the face is done exceptionally well. The sculpt work on the tentacles is sharp, and as much as they could make it, the back of the design is clean. There's only one gripe that I have with the figure that can actually be considered fair criticism, and that's that the arms don't stay locked in at all. There's basically nowhere for them to plug in since they didn't actually put a slot there. That said, it does offer extra unintentional articulation, which is a plus. Due to this, you technically get 2 ball joints and hinges on each tentacle section. Even the head rotates. Come on, brilliant. So yes, this mode is done pretty flawlessly. It passes with flying colors, but I just don't like it. I'm sorry, but we all have personal preferences. Still, if you like the way this looks and are concerned about it being just a Moonracer retool, don't worry, it definitely rises above it. Accessory-wise, you get another handpiece, and this one seamlessly stores on the back of the head. Out of all the Seacons, this easily outclasses any hand storage that has come before it. Utterly brilliant. On the other hand, the axe storage is pretty awful. The irony is, it could have been fixed in the same way I mentioned yesterday, no less. Had they ended up swapping the weapons between Overbite and Tentakil, a knife could have easily fit on the back of the handpiece, although I guess that would have left Overbite with poor beast weapon mode storage. So maybe on second thoughts, Hold that thought. And finally, you get two guns. They're a smidge difficult to fit in there, but surprisingly they actually look quite good. And for those curious, yes, they are indeed War for Cybertron Blast Effect compatible. Although considering the Battle Masters have moved to ramps these days, I think it's a bit more difficult to come across those blast effects on store shelves. Maybe Deluxes should start having pack-in blast effects too? That'd be pretty cool. So I have just realized that I have not done a proper size comparison for this fellow, so here are the dimensions on the screen right now, and of course here's a regular Deluxe just for comparison's sake. You should probably have that all at home at this point. But anyway, yes, the retooling on this guy is completely and utterly crazy, but at the end of the day, the transformation still remains largely the same, except for the fact that the tolerances are far improved, so it feels a lot better when transforming it. Untab the arms from here, although I say untab very loosely. That'll give you clearance to move up the mask. Take the legs and untab them from there. Push the face as far back as possible, because then you can come around here and actually open that, and then you'll get access to the head and you can close that back up again. Then get the mask as far out of the way as possible. Rotate the waist section, not the transformation waist, the articulated waist, 180 degrees, and then come around to the feet and untap them from there and open them up, and then separate the legs, and then you can move the feet to however you like. Then push the mask down again and rotate the transformation waist, not the articulation waist, 180 degrees, a lot of rotating. Then you got two pegs here and two slots there. They look like a sort of hinge thing, but they're not, and that will all just peg together pretty simply and pretty sturdily. And then you can sort of collapse the tentacles along the back. When that's all done, you just bring the feet down, the beast feet, not the robot feet. And last but not least, use the double hinge to rotate that back, like so. Well, I say rotate, but it's more shift back. And there's Tentakil in his robot mode, and my, what an improvement over the original Moonracer. He's not actually shit. Good job. In robot mode, Tentakil is at the very least a little more than you'd expect. That is to say, the backpack still is kind of annoying, but thankfully everything else has been massively upgraded. For starters, much like the transformation, all the joint tolerances have been completely fixed, so posing Tentakil actually feels satisfying, unlike his fembot predecessor. Design-wise too, things aren't just drastically different, they're drastically better. Virtually every piece has been retooled, aside from the waist and a few joints here and there, and as a result, many of the weird tooling choices that seemed quite ugly on the original version, and I'm not talking about the kibble either because we'll get to that later on, have been completely fixed. No longer do the thighs seem under-tooled and out of place with the rest of the body. They've now been changed to proper square extensions with a healthy dose of paint to help them stand out. The arm detail works surprisingly well, and even the kibble manages to get out of the way. On the topic of kibble, everything is drastically improved as well. Gone are the god-awful struts on the arms, an issue that even the Siege version was unable to negate. Instead, everything is much cleaner. The legs have also had a massive overhaul, and not only are they better on their own merits, but they actually look really cool. Plus, thank the feet actually look sharp and pointing this time, as opposed to oversized clown shoes. And yes, I'm fully aware that there is a pretty hefty backpack here, and it does stick upwards a little more than Moonracer's did, so you do get a panel behind the head, but despite being made from blended squid parts, it actually manages to look more cohesive than the original, for a number of reasons. Firstly, the aesthetic matches much closer. You've now got swish robot parts and a swish backwards flowing backpack. Compare that to Moonracer, who has a triangular look for the robot mode, and her backpack is a giant brick. Secondly, and this is somewhat related to the first, it creates the illusion of not going far as back. It actually juts out slightly further, which can be proven by measuring the two, but the design failures on the original make it seem like the opposites. And finally, everything flows better. The backpack flows outwards as well as backwards, so there's no harsh steps, whereas Moonracer's is so bad you actively have shit hanging downward as well as backward. There really isn't much to complain about here aside from the somewhat lackluster head sculpt. It's not the best, and I feel it could have used a lot more paint on the spike at the top, but it's not terrible by any means. And at least it's better than what we had earlier. I don't know how anyone thought this was acceptable. Articulation-wise, Tentakil has virtually the same articulation as Golf, with two key exceptions. You have extra joints on the ankle in terms of a tilt and a pivot, and the wrists move inwards. On the original, these points kinda seemed janky, but for some reason they really work well here, and accent his posability tremendously. This helps when posing with the accessories too. The axe works about as well as it did with Kraken, although Tentakil isn't garbage, so that's an instant plus for display options. And the dual pistols honestly look like water guns. They don't look bad by any means, but they are hella weird. Size-wise, by nature of the designers stupidly insisting that fembots be petite, which seems almost sexist of Takara, but whatever.
Because apparently women are terrible!
Tentakil is a hair shorter than most combiner limbs in robot mode. The design doesn't feel like it though, although maybe that's by virtue of everyone being used to War for Cybertron and Studio Series Deluxes these days. Now Now, contrary to popular belief, neither Tentakil nor Moonracer have two separate leg modes. It might seem like they do given the peg at the front in a manner similar to the Combiner Wars Rook family of molds, but this peg is angled slightly, so it doesn't work and is purely for weapon storage. Massively missed opportunity on the count of the Power of the Prime's designers. But shitting on that series is like beating a dead horse, although it probably won't stop me from doing that in a few episodes from now. The actual leg mode is decent. It holds together well enough and the gun storage works properly, which itself doesn't seem that remarkable, but when you realize that a lot of the legs of this set have been quite underwhelming, the attention to detail they put into the two that actually will become legs is quite commendable. It's even more commendable when you realize the original didn't at all. It was a piece of shit. Big f***ing surprise. Unfortunately, there's just no saving the arm mode. Considering the stock configuration, it makes sense that they actively ignored the least likely setup, but it still is a teeny bit disappointing. There's just so many bits hanging off the back and the tentacles keep getting in the way. It's such an unfortunate way of doing things. Still, at least it's better than the Target Master mode, or at least the stock Target Master mode. Jesus Christ, we just keep reaching new lows on this! I came up with a fan mode for this, which should be easy to figure out on its own, and it does look much better, but even then, this thing was not designed to be used as a gun. With all that said though, I still don't like the figure personally. The robot mode is done very well and the transformation is a massive step up from the original, but that alt mode, I'm sorry, when it comes to personal preferences, I just can't get over it. Maybe Repro Labels will fix it up and I may come to enjoy it in the future, but for now, even though it's far from the worst, it still remains my least favorite of the bunch. But that doesn't make this figure bad by any means. In fact, engineering-wise, it's probably one of the best in the entire box set. If you're not concerned with how this looks, and you're only concerned with its relation to the Moonracer mold, then don't stress. It definitely rises above that and delivers a truly amazing experience. It's a fantastically engineered, fantastically painted, fantastically sculpted, and very solid member of the team. That much I cannot deny. But at the end of the day, I just don't like it. That's just personal preference. But at the very least, it's good that we ended this set on a high before actually going into the combined mode. And with all the team members finally outlined, and before we go onto the combined mode tomorrow, why don't you check out today's sponsor, Robotoys. Robotoys specializes in Hasbro Takara third-party and knockoff figures, and if you haven't already, make sure to use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout for 10% off a single order. I've said this several times before, but I'll say it again. Unfortunately, King Poseidon's out of stock at the moment. But who knows, Takara might reissue him at some point in the future, and we might actually get a God Neptune as well. So, you know, there's options that'll probably come forward eventually. And with that all out of the way, we are done with each of the individual members. And I suppose that only leaves one more thing to do.
Tentakil, Tentakil, Tentakil. No, no, イカイカパンチ10足墨は毒強い子ぶり子シーコンズ